Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election and talking largely about minority populations and how they might be the key to victory for President Biden in the 2024 election, and how just simple margins and simple population growths in key battleground states could be the inevitable key that Donald Trump ultimately finds to serve him a second loss, and Joe Biden another 4 years in the White House. Now, on your screen is the 2024 electoral map, and with it, we are going to talk about individual states where we have seen extensive, in some cases, and even some significant, but not extensive, as I would declare it, minority growth in battleground states, in battleground regions. You're talking about important cities, important districts. Pretty much these states are going to determine the outcome of the election, and right now Democrats have one thing going for them, despite the polls showing Donald Trump leading in nearly all of the battleground states: demographic trends that, if tapped into correctly, could hand Joe Biden, again, another 4-year term in the White House. And so, of course, demographics are a key part of every single state as to how they vote and why they vote the way that they do. And so it won't really be something that we talk about when we're characterizing what we like to call safe and likely states. I really want to spend the majority of this video talking about the key and crucial states, because those are the ones that you are going to be seeing investments in. From the Trump campaign, from the Biden campaign, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars across these battleground states because, arguably, they matter the most. They're the ones that are going to truly determine the outcome of the presidency and aren't really up for grabs, even if one candidate, like Donald Trump or Joe Biden, declares that it might be just based on vibes. This is an election where we can pretty much say with near certainty for around 90% of states or 80% of states, this is how this state is going to go. We could have told you 4 years ago, we could have told you 8 years ago. A lot of these states just simply aren't up for grabs because they've been voting a certain way for an extended period of time, and no matter what happens related to demographics, and even if the demographics in some instances look favorable, for instance in states like Mississippi and Louisiana, where the black population is quite high, and what we know about minority voters in the country, and specifically black voters, which are the most reliable group for the Democratic Party when it comes down to racial demographics, it still does not make that state competitive. And so there are so many factors that play here beyond demographics, and so that's what we're going to talk about here. Add a little bit of nuance to our general conversation about what demographics mean for either candidate, but generally speaking, I want to spend this time talking about how President Biden could truly just skate by in this election and win re-election simply on the backs of minority voters and population growth that we have seen in a number of these key and crucial states. And so on your screen right now are pretty much all of the states that we declare from the beginning to be safe. These are states that we really don't give much attention to, and neither do the candidates. And that's because these states are going to go either red or blue, regardless of who the presidential nominee is, regardless of the type of campaigning or the level of enthusiasm for either side. These states are pretty much cut and dry going to be going to the Republicans or Democrats, regardless of what we say, what we hear, what happens on the presidential level. With that being said, to save us some time here, we're also going to characterize the states that we determine to be likely states. States that you really don't see much consideration here of it going to Democrats or Republicans, and although they might be more competitive, and in some reality they could flip to the other side of the aisle, they probably won't in this election, and that's why we're pretty solid on it, but wouldn't lock in with 100% certainty because crazier things have happened in American politics. And so that includes states like Iowa and Ohio and Florida that we know are going to go to the GOP, but the margin could be closer and probably will be closer than a 15-point margin that we've seen for some of these other states, including surrounding ones like Indiana for Ohio, Missouri for Iowa, or Alabama for Florida. This also includes the battleground state of Texas. Now, it traditionally is a more competitive state, and I wanted to wait before I called it because I wanted to talk briefly about its very high minority population here. White Americans in Texas, or white Texans, make up the minority of voters, of demographics in Texas, and so you might think in the top of your head, this state is automatically going to go to the Democratic Party, given how favorable the numbers are in pure demographics. This is what I mean by there's more than just what we talk about when it comes down to, the concept of race, the identification of, partisan voters broken down by race. Obviously, minority voters have helped Democrats. We know this based on national exit polling data from 2020, 16, 12, 08, 04, 2000. The list goes on and on and on because minority voters have been the voting group for Democrats for a very long period of time. I mean, you're talking since the civil rights era, Democrats have pretty much been steamrolling Republicans in every demographic group besides white voters. With that being said, white voters do make up a significant portion of this country, and in some states, over 80–90% of the overall demographic when it comes down to who ends up voting in the actual election. Now, in Texas, this is a state that has a very high minority population, but I will say that doesn't mean it's a Democratic state. It is clear here that white voters turn out at a higher rate. Latino voters in this state are not a monolith. In some pockets of the state, they are very Democratic. In other pockets, they are very Republican. And so, in a way, it balances itself out to be very much a swing state, largely driven by minority voters that are voting blue and counteracting what you see from some of the more rural voters, more active voters that end up being older and whiter voters that, again, the two demographic groups in terms of age and race that Republicans typically do well in, that keeps Texas in the red column. Now, in terms of states that Democrats have pretty much off the baseline, and I'm not going to say this with 100% certainty, Maine second, we're going to give to the Republicans, Nebraska second to the Democrats. That's moving over because it's a likely column, characterization. Democrats also have been able to tap into some states, even if they don't necessarily have high minority populations. Those states are crucial if Biden is to win re-election. And so I'm thinking about states like Minnesota, where absolutely the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, you're talking about, yes, minority voters are crucial in some cases for Democratic victories here. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton won by 1.5, I would say it would be crucial in retrospect, in hindsight. Looking at 2020, when Biden's winning by 7, not as much, but of course, still a piece of the puzzle, still a necessary component on the broad strokes, the national level, so we'll talk about that. New Hampshire, very white state, one of the whitest in the country. Still, a Biden state will be a Biden state. Virginia has a different type of demographic breakdown than some other battleground states. Virginia has a very high Asian American population, still very much high minority population in general, at least for, compared to some of its surrounding states. I will say, at least West Virginia. But looking at Virginia right now, I would say Democrats are probably going to win there. They're probably going to win Colorado, New Mexico. These are all states they won by more than 10 points in the 2020 presidential election. And so this brings us down to our core 7 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the big 3, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, the Sun Belt 4. And so these are the states that you're going to be seeing, again, hundreds of millions of dollars poured into. Now, why are they so important, and how do they play into this idea of racial demographic breakdowns, the idea of, higher populations translating to just a very narrow Democratic victory? And I want us to take a look back at the last presidential election. In 2020, we saw that President Biden won his election with 306 electoral votes. He won all of the states that are in that toss-up column right now, except for North Carolina, and a lot of that had to do with increased minority turnout, some of the highest numbers we've seen across the country since 1900, before the sinking of the Titanic, to put it into a more historical lens there. You are talking about, in over 100 years, the highest turnout we've seen on a presidential level, and it required Democrats to have that high turnout in order to win in these battleground states. Now, here's the good news for Democrats. The populations we saw in 2020 are not the same populations we see in 2024. In nearly every aspect, they have improved for Democrats in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. Now, it's a bit iffy when it comes down to the Rust Belt states. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we have started to see a decline in minority voters in some ways, but also it's starting to level off. The problem just lies in the fact that Republicans continue to max out and max out and max out rural areas, whereas Democrats aren't making that many inroads amongst urban areas, areas where you typically find higher populations of minority voters in these battleground states. Suburban voters, though, are shifting more in favor of the Democratic Party. And so that's where you're starting to see that counteracted by in these battleground states up north. But what you are finding is that in the South, in the Sun Belt region, even areas that might not declare themselves Southern, as Nevada or Arizona certainly might not, but you do find that it is these minority voters in these key states that are driving, Democrats in favor, driving Democrats in a favorable way. And so you see it even from 2012 to 2016. The trend here is well documented. You can see that between 2012 and 2016, Arizona got 6 points bluer despite Hillary Clinton losing the presidential election. Georgia got 3 points bluer. Texas got 7 points bluer. And while Nevada did get redder, Hillary Clinton ended up winning here, and honestly speaking, it isn't one of the states that we're going to be talking about too heavily in terms of, significantly increased populations here, especially amongst minority voters. Nevada is pretty stagnant, and while the population growth might still be there, most states are gaining in terms of population, it isn't enough for me to make that a center point of this video. And so we're really focused on states like Arizona and Georgia, 2 states that I think, despite Texas shifting blue, I don't think that these states, are going to be ones that are still out of reach come November, like I think Texas might be for President Biden in a few months from now. And so Arizona and Georgia, between 2016 and 2020, Arizona became 4 points bluer, and Georgia 5 points bluer. And it isn't just the fact that, sure, there absolutely were white suburbanites in these states that did shift left. And yes, there was increased minority turnout. But it was because of the fact that you saw growth in the Atlanta metro area, or in the area surrounding in and around Phoenix, Arizona. in Maricopa County that drove up Democratic turnout because simply there were more people in these states. And now in 2024, you find, despite them not gaining in electoral votes, including North Carolina, which actually did gain a singular electoral vote, you are in fact seeing increased, population in these battleground states, going so far as to seeing that in 2050, you will see here that it will be potentially 7.9 million people in the metro Atlanta region, which is a huge pocket for Democratic voting bases. I mean, a pocket at which we really have never seen before. You can see it in 2020 as something that is very shocking compared to where it had been before. In 2012, a lot of these areas, in fact, some of them, Gwinnett County, Cobb County, those were Romney counties. What happened? Gwinnett became Biden plus 18. Cobb became Biden plus 14. Yes, voters did shift, but more voters moved in there. The population growth there, specifically from Black Americans in Georgia, coming from across the country down to the Atlanta metro region, they are driving Democratic turnout up. They are driving President Biden and Kamala Harris's, Vice President Harris's re-election bid in 2024 and was the reason why they were elected in Georgia and Arizona in 2020. There obviously are a number of combining factors here that contribute to this, but it cannot be ignored. That population growth, the sheer increase of Democratic voting numbers in these states, if Democrats can maintain these margins, or even with a little bit of slipping, they could very much skate to re-election. Because a situation that arises such as that, we'll go back really quick to talk about Arizona, because you're seeing here that there is a boost, what we're finding, a boost in growth for minority voters in this state. You're seeing homeownership rates up for minority groups in Arizona. You're seeing that Republicans in Georgia are getting scared and now trying to shift to make a bigger tent party because minority voters are becoming increasingly larger portions of the electorate in Georgia. More urban and diverse voters as white residents dip, quite literally leaving the state too. It isn't just an influx of minority voters, it's an exodus of white Republican voters. And so that really is a big problem here. And it isn't just, the South. You also see it in Pennsylvania. You're seeing it in some of these states here, and Republicans and Democrats even are getting a little worried because they're looking at this and saying, Democrats are looking at this and saying, we know this is our pathway to victory. We know this is how we win. This is how we have won in years past. I mean, we should not mess this up because it would be, wrong to mess up. Because we know that this base is with us, and as this population increases, it becomes a better opportunity for them to tap it in. So what is that opportunity? Well, a map like this one might arise. Republicans win Pennsylvania. Republicans win North Carolina. Republicans win Wisconsin. But Democrats hold on to Nevada, as they have since every election since 2004. Democrats win Arizona because Maricopa County pulls through and there's an influx of residents in Phoenix, Arizona, and just an increase in the Hispanic or Latino population there that just pushes Joe Biden over the finish line. And in Georgia, an increase of black voters in this state. Asian American voters also play a major role in Georgia. So that brings Biden to 259. In this scenario, it would take President Biden winning a state like Michigan that he won by 2.8 in 2020 in 2024. And with these states, despite losing Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Iowa, all states that the Biden campaign either targeted in 2020 or are targeting again in 2024, and despite that, Joe Biden could win re-election. It is these states in particular that the influx of minority voters here, again, could be that one crucial component that could save Joe Biden's re-election bid. Even if he doesn't win a number of key and crucial states, he could win the election on this basis alone. And that is something that I think terrifies Republicans because they see that these numbers have increased for Democrats, and you can actually see it electorally. I'm not just asking you to visualize this. I'm asking you to see this from 2022 when Raphael Warnock saw a significantly better performance in the general election come November 8th and then ended up winning the runoff election. In Arizona, Mark Kelly expanded his margin of victory from 2020, an increase of support from Maricopa County, and specifically just a higher vote share there, despite it being a midterm election year with an unpopular Democratic president. A lot of what we see in recent elections here tell us that Arizona and Georgia and a number of other states too. For instance, we can apply this same type of thinking to states like Pennsylvania, where you do in fact see Latino voters increasing in political relevance there, black voters staying the same amount, at least in terms of relevancy, in terms of portion of the electorate. I mean, you are finding that it is minority voters in these states that could give Joe Biden that narrow bump just over the finish line, that despite failed efforts in some cases, or in some cases failures in swing states, Joe Biden can still get by in the election. Ultimately, this election does come down to Joe Biden's base. The reason he's losing on the national level, and you can see it in the polls because they won't prove me wrong on this, is that it isn't that Donald Trump is winning over, voters from 2020 that voted for Biden. It isn't that all of a sudden we're seeing a new reckoning across the country where this country identifies more with the Republicans than they do the Democrats. Because all the down ballot numbers say the same thing, that Democrats are ahead in these states. All the national numbers say that are besides the presidential level, that the race is significantly closer, and in fact more pro-democratic than it might otherwise seem, because at the baseline, Americans are not fundamentally Republicans. They aren't fundamentally Democrats either, but they certainly, as you've seen in the popular vote, Republicans haven't won it in any election in the 21st century except 2004. It is that reveals that Democrats are in fact in the majority, or in some cases the plurality. Regardless though, it's the same in battleground states. And so Biden can win, but right now he doesn't have his base. Trump is under 50% in nearly every battleground state, and so is Biden. But should that base return, and should that base turn out, with an increase in population in Georgia and Arizona, it takes just one battleground Rust Belt state to win the election, and that isn't impossible to see. Michigan could very well go blue, as could so many of the other states from 2020, and minority voters will be key and crucial for that. And we will see if they turn out for Joe Biden this coming November, because if they do, it's hard to see a pathway for President Trump in 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.